I used to be employed as a child protection worker. A report came through one day about a stepfather who was being abusive to his children. I was given the investigation by my team leader. When I interviewed the oldest child with the police, she had very visible physical injuries and told me exactly what happened. I'll spare the details, but it was pretty horrific. As the children were in his sole care, we knew they needed to be removed immediately. We sent a team of 2 workers out to the children's school, while myself and a colleague called the stepfather into the office. I led the interview and it was horrible. He didn't even try to deny he had hurt his children, instead basically saying, "That's my kid and I'll do what I want. You can't stop me." Well, when I served him with the paperwork, he absolutely lost his mind. He was swearing and screaming and basically said, "If we were outside this building right now, I would fucking kill you." We ended up running out of the interview room, pressing the emergency alarm. I even had to make a police report about the whole thing. It got really messy. The next day, we had court for the children, and my manager decided I shouldn't attend due to everything that happened the previous day. My colleague who did attend told me the man was at court and even yelled several times something to the effect of, "Where is that cunt of a worker who took my kids?" I remember feeling a little freaked out. It's not uncommon to hear things similar to this when you have to remove a child. It's understandable that emotions are very high. You build a sort of resilience working in this field though, and overall I mainly felt relieved those children had been placed with an aunt and were now safe from that man. About 2 weeks later, I had to stay back late at the office on an unrelated job. It was about 9 p.m. when I finished, and I was the only person there. I walked out the back of the building to my car. It was really dark, but when I got close, I thought I saw a shadow moving around the front of my car. It was just for a second, and then it was gone like it was never there. I was about 20 meters away at this point, but that really startled me. I stood there for a moment, just looking at my car and wondering if I was being paranoid. While staring into the darkness, I started hearing these tiny rustling noises. Whether imagined or not, all the true crime horror stories I've ever heard flashed into my mind. Safe to say, I freaked out and sprinted back to the building. I called my boyfriend to come pick me up, explaining what had happened. By the time he drove up to the front doors, I had convinced myself I was being silly and asked him to drive me around to my car. He circled around, and with the headlights now shining on it, I could very clearly see all 4 of my tires had been slashed. I was an absolute mess that night and called the police immediately. I was pretty sure that man was responsible, but as I hadn't actually seen him, I couldn't say for sure. I took a few days off and came back to a meeting with my manager, who had put together a safety plan for me and the other staff. She'd organized to have a security guard escort us to our cars, and said very clearly no one was to stay in the building after hours alone. Then, about a week later, a letter was delivered to the office addressed to me. Any mail that comes into the office goes to our reception staff. Our lovely receptionist opened it. Inside was a note that said, "You're as good as dead, bitch." She's an older woman, so she burst into tears as she read that. It didn't say who had sent it, but I was pretty sure I had an idea. Over the next few weeks, letters kept coming, each one getting longer. They always addressed me as a bitch or a homewrecker, saying I kidnap and abuse children. It was just horrible, horrible stuff. The threats in all the letters were even worse. The person writing them threatened to torture, kill, find out where I live, and burn down the entire building. To be honest, the police were less than helpful. They basically said given the nature of our work, they couldn't conclusively say it was that man, although they already had questioned him. To me, it all seemed like a pretty massive coincidence. I'd never had anything like this happen before. They did say they were taking the letters very seriously and tracking down where they'd been posted from, but I never heard anything back about that. My workplace took the threats seriously too. All the security was bumped up across the building, and all staff completed refresher training on emergency management. One day, on the way home from work, I noticed a car seemed to be following me. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, so I drove down a bunch of little side streets, double-backed onto the same road in a way that would make absolutely no sense too. Even after all that, the dark green Camry was still placed just a little ways behind me. I freaked out, but I'd already planned in my head what I was going to do in this situation. I headed straight to the police station, planning to pull right up to the front of the building and beat my horn until I had someone's attention. The second I pulled in, the green Camry shot straight past me and disappeared down a nearby side street. I sat there for a good 20 minutes, too scared to get out of the car in case they came back around the corner. It dawned on me that in my panic, I'd forgotten to get the license plate. Honestly, that still kind of upsets me to this day. I told the police what I knew, but they told me the man didn't have any registered car in his name. This was the final straw for me. I was a nervous wreck. I was looking around constantly at work and at home. I knew he lived relatively close to me, so I even stopped grocery shopping just in case I ran into him. I stayed on stress leave for a month and heard from colleagues that the letters kept arriving all the same. I was honestly ready to quit, but then COVID happened, and it really changed everything. Everyone went into lockdown, and all access to the office was restricted. I started back working from home, driving a work car to and from appointments. I didn't go into the office regularly anymore, only in small working groups when absolutely necessary. Over the next year, the letters slowed down and eventually stopped. By the time we were allowed back in the office, there hadn't been any sign for almost 7 months. About a year later, I left child protection. I don't know what happened to those children, but my hope is they're happy and safe with a new family. As for the man who I believe stalked and threatened me for doing my job, I hope I never have to run into him again. Last night, I encountered a situation that truly made me realize the value of life over materialistic possessions. I need to process this, so any insights or perspectives will be greatly appreciated. Background: the incident took place around 2 a.m. after a party on the west side of Chicago. It's important to note that this particular area is notorious for a high crime rate. I'd been at this informal backyard gathering with a close buddy. We were just trying to unwind and have a good time. Throughout the evening, though, I couldn't help but notice one guy who, for reasons unbeknownst to me, seemed to have taken issue with my presence there. This wasn't the first party where I'd felt this unsettling gaze or heard his unwarranted insults either. As the night came to a close, my buddy and I decided to leave. On our way out, I took a brief moment to relieve myself by a nearby wall. Following that, we waited by a car while our Uber was en route. As we stood there, the aforementioned guy approached me, engaging me in what seemed to be an attempt at conversation. When he asked what I was up to, I reciprocated the question, trying to keep things fairly casual. At some point, I inquired if he had anything. I honestly can't recall why I did that, and declined when he confirmed. Looking back, he might have interpreted my demeanor as challenging or confrontational. Things escalated terrifyingly fast. He'd called over a friend, and before I could even process what was happening, they lunged at me together. Suddenly, it felt like the whole party was turning against me. I was surrounded by over 10 people now, all of them attacking me with an intensity I'd never experienced before. Punches, kicks, shouts, screaming. The chaos was overwhelming. As they assaulted me, they grabbed my chain, my phone, and my bag, which thankfully was empty at the time. My friend was powerless to intervene. Even more shockingly, the security present, rather than diffusing the situation, tried to join in. I tried to protect myself, focusing on shielding my head, but there was no way I could fend off such a large group, especially given some of them were armed and had clear gang affiliations. After what felt like an eternity, they finally let up, hurling final insults and threats at me as they ordered me to leave. My buddy and I staggered away, grateful to escape with our lives but deeply shaken. I'm still grappling with what happened that night. Why did they target me so viciously? Was there some underlying issue I wasn't aware of? And why had the situation escalated so quickly? When I was a senior in college a few years ago, I lived in an old house about a 5-minute walk from my campus with 5 of my girlfriends. It was still COVID times, so we spent a lot of time just in the house since we couldn't really go anywhere. To preface this, the house was really old. Many of the windows didn't even lock because of how old it was. Our landlord sucked too, as many college ones tend to do. They refused to do anything to fix the issue. With it being 6 of us and often a boyfriend or 2 sleeping in the house though, it mostly felt safe, and many of us would keep our windows open. Our college was in a town just outside of the second most dangerous city in the state, but right around campus it felt relatively safe. When the weather started getting warmer in early spring, we would sit out on the roof to sunbathe together. This roof faced our street. We would access the roof from my roommate's, let's call her Mary, bedroom window on the 2nd floor. It led straight up there. Our street was residential and didn't get a ton of traffic. We did have a couple of encounters of a younger guy's catcalling us as they drove by, but nothing seemed too sinister. One night in the late semester though, Mary went up to her room to call her brother while the rest of us were hanging out downstairs. That's when she rushed back downstairs and said she'd seen a ladder leading up to the roof, where we would all usually sunbathe. It was right next to her window, which was open. Later, we learned she said out loud to her brother what she saw before she came down. When she told us this, my other roommate and her boyfriend ran outside, only to find a man swiftly running away from our house with the ladder in tow. We assumed he must have heard Mary telling her brother she'd seen him and knew he was caught. It was dark, so we couldn't make out much about him. I immediately texted our landlord, asking if he had someone to come by and do emergency housework. He said no. We then called the police, who came by soon after. They did some investigating and patrolled our house for a couple of nights, but we never found out who the man was, what his true intentions were, or even if he'd been there before. Hi everyone, I usually don't share my own experiences, but I need to get out what just happened a few hours ago. This seemed like the perfect place to share. For some background first, I'm a 29-year-old woman. I live in an apartment in a sketchier side of town, so I'm not unaccustomed to strange people pulling up and strange things happening. I've been through a home break-in even, so I'm hyper-vigilant when it comes to keeping myself and my home safe. I smoke cigarettes, a nasty habit I know, but having cats and not wanting my house to reek of smoke, I'll often walk out to my balcony to do a quick smoke. And that's exactly what I was doing when this incident occurred. I was sitting on my balcony smoking, just enjoying my night, when I noticed a car I'd never seen before pull into the back parking lot of my apartment, right next to my balcony. I could immediately feel something a bit off, but I didn't want to come off as being a paranoid neighbor or something. I just kept sitting and minding my own business, smoking my cigarette. Then though, I began to hear footsteps, making a beeline through my backyard. I looked down, only to see a large burly man I'd never seen before, skulking about in my backyard. Again, I didn't try to make much of it. Maybe they were there for my neighbor or something. My anxiety was definitely on high alert, but I was not in panic mode yet. That was until I realized he was going straight for my portion of the area. He then did something that's still freaking me out as I typed this. He stopped right underneath, looked up at me on my balcony not saying a word, and began to just stare at me. Now I was in absolute panic mode. I audibly said, "Oh, fuck this." I sprang up, slammed and locked my balcony door, ran upstairs to my bathroom and dialed 911. I listened to every sound from downstairs while I stood there panicking in my bathroom. I could hear what sounded like him trying to mess with my back door now. I can't say for sure though because I was in hypervigilance mode. I do know that he was in my backyard for a while longer, because I was in my bathroom for several minutes until I decided to peek out my balcony window, only to see him walking to his car and jumping in. That tells me I don't think he was there to rob me, but to do something more sinister. Luckily, he must have been lazy, because again, I live on the cheaper side of town, so you can imagine the quality of my doors and locks. I'm really hoping it was just some guy who was drunk or high and had the wrong house, but something is telling me it's otherwise. Let me start off by saying I'm a 16-year-old male and an only child who lives in a quiet rural area surrounded by fields and Amish country. I'm going to use the alias John for this story. One Saturday evening, after an afternoon of occasional rain showers, I was home alone while my parents were out for their anniversary. They had just recently left to go out when I decided to take a walk now that the rain had stopped for I don't know how long. I go into my garage, slip on my shoes, and head on out our sliding back door in our kitchen. The backyard was large and fenced in, as we used to have some dogs. There was a gate in the fence just off the patio that leads to our underground swimming pool, then another that leads into the side of our yard. I exited through there and headed down to my driveway and onto the road. I was out for maybe an hour or so when I finally returned from my rather simple exercise of walking up and down the road while waving to any friendly neighbors I saw. I walked towards my side yard when I noticed that the gate I'd exited out of earlier was still open. I must have forgotten to close and secure it, I thought to myself. It was a bit windy that day, so perhaps the wind had opened it up because I'd forgotten. Oh well. I headed through the gate, through our pool area, back onto the patio, and in through the sliding glass door. Later on, as the night began to set in further, I had just finished baking and eating half of a frozen DiGiorno stuffed crust pepperoni pizza when I heard one of the fence gates slowly creaking open. Obviously frightened, I thought at first maybe it was my mom or dad coming home early. They'd always call me when they were on their way home from wherever they were at though, so that surely couldn't have been it. I ran throughout the house and locked every door and window. I waited and listened in my kitchen for any further suspicious sounds. After about 5 minutes of not hearing anything else, I thought maybe it had just been my imagination, or maybe I'd again forgotten to lock the gate on my way in and the wind had blown it open again. I decided to quickly head outside and check it out. By now, it was completely dark and cloudy, so I grabbed a flashlight out of a drawer in the kitchen and crept out the front door. Once I was out on my driveway, I shone my flashlight down the side yard towards our shed. Okay, nothing there. So far, so good. I walked down the side yard slowly and was pointing my flashlight in every direction, keeping myself aware of my surroundings. Once I finally crept up to the gate, I saw it was wide open. Must have forgotten to lock it again, I thought to myself. I face-palmed. I shut it and locked it, then turned around to head back towards my driveway. All of a sudden, though, I noticed something out of the very corner of my eye in the darkness. My heart dropped as I shined my flashlight quickly towards my backyard and caught a glimpse of the backside of somebody walking behind my shed. From what I saw, I could make out that this was a person with dark hair wearing a black hoodie and sweatpants, and they appeared to be carrying something in their left hand. I could just barely make out what appeared to be the blade of a knife or some sort of small, sharp instrument. At this point, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to confront this person or go inside and call my parents. I stood frozen for a few seconds, hand trembling, as I finally decided to call my mom. After 2 rings, she picked up. "Hello, John. You need something, sweetheart?" she asked. I felt a bit more comfortable now. "Yeah, Mom, I think there's someone in our yard," I said, taking a deep breath. My mom gasped, and her voice got a bit frantic. This was the first time something like this had ever happened. "Where are you now?" I continued looking out towards my shed, now lit up by the flashlight. I could no longer see the person anywhere. "I'm out on the driveway," I heard the gate open and went outside to check it out. I saw someone. He was walking toward the back side of the shed and carrying something. I think it's a knife or something like that. My mom gasped again, and this time I heard my dad ask what was wrong. She told him what happened as I stood there and eyed for any movement. We're heading home right now. Call 911. Don't go chasing him or anything stupid like that. All right, Mom, I'm going back inside right now. After exchanging our farewells, I turned around to rush back into the house. Once I turned the corner to head back to my front door, though, I saw somebody walking down the road right in front of me. My heart sank as I stood there in shock, ready to flash my flashlight at whoever this was. The person stopped walking and stood still for a couple of seconds before slowly turning their head in my direction. They must have heard me walking as well. I instinctively whipped the light up and shined it at the person's face. It was a male, I don't know how old, dressed in a black zip-up hoodie and black sweatpants. No doubt it was the same person I'd seen behind my shed. I could only see one of his eyes, as the other was completely covered by something. He looked at me with this blank, expressionless face. It almost felt like he was glaring directly into my soul. This time, I didn't see his knife, but he did have his hand in his hoodie pocket. Without a single word or facial gesture, he slowly began to walk backward before turning around and continuing down the road. After a few seconds, I ran up the road in front of my house and peered down it. I didn't see him anymore. He must have entered someone else's yard. I ran back inside and waited for my dad and mom to get home, as I called police in the meantime. Once a state trooper arrived, I told them everything, from the gate being fondled with to the encounter I'd had with him in front of my house. The trooper told me there had been several calls in the past few months about a person matching that description I gave them being spotted in several different areas, acting very suspiciously. That interested me greatly, I must say. I tried to ask him more about it, but he declined to answer. Once my parents arrived, they talked with the trooper a bit before he finally left. Afterwards, my parents and I talked about what happened before sitting down to watch a movie, which made us all fall asleep together. Nothing much changed after that night, though. I still live here, and my parents still let me stay home alone, but we've gotten a home security system just in case, and I'm more vigilant whenever I'm by myself.